Now in its 32nd year, the Jazz Foundation of America is a national nonprofit providing compassionate, personalized, and discreet support to jazz, blues, and roots musicians in need as a result of age, illness, or just circumstance. Support includes emergency financial, pro bono medical, rent and mortgage assistance, disaster relief, counseling, instrument repair and replacement, and much, much more. And joining us today to talk about a special partnership between WBGO and the Jazz Foundation of America is the JFA Executive Director, Joe Petrucelli, and co-artistic director for the JFA, and acclaimed drummer, producer, composer. We could go on and on about Steve Jordan. Thanks to both of you for joining us here on the WBGO Journal.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having us.
So, Joe, let's start off with you. What's the latest that's been happening with the Jazz Foundation of America? And obviously, we know it's been difficult times during COVID, but give us some of the ideas and thoughts that have been going across the association lately on how you can help, who you're helping.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, we are approaching the anniversary of the declaration of the pandemic and the anniversary of the lockdown. So it's been a time of reflection for sure. You know, at this time last year, by the end of March, we had established our COVID-19 Musicians Emergency Fund, which is really an extension of our core program, the Musicians Emergency Fund, which provides kind of direct and flexible financial assistance for whatever circumstances kind of artist is confronting. And, you know, we have continuously been processing new applications for service for the foundation and assistance in the foundation since last March. It was only a couple of weeks ago, really, that we kind of observed the milestone of not having any new cases in the queue. But up until that point, it was, you know, just steady need for this emergency relief, and completely understandable. So, you know, at this point, we are looking back and looking forward. In the past year, we basically doubled our client load, and this is all, you know, one-on-one, direct assistance, you know, with our social workers and our case managers, not hands-on in the way that we traditionally are, but, you know, connecting via phone or video chat, and, you know, trying to customize sort of solutions and just provide, you know, support as quickly as possible, with the maximum of empathy and understanding, and with a you know, and trying to make the whole process as smooth for everyone as possible, knowing, you know, how challenging the times have been. So, you know, at this point, you know, we're looking forward to a few major events and activities in the spring. One is, you know, we're very encouraged to see a lot of musicians getting vaccinated, and, you know, we're doing what we can to support that effort. I mean, and this begins with our COVID-19 Musicians Emergency Fund resource page, but, you know, we are facilitating appointments where we can. You know, we have a part-time caseworker who's an expert navigator working with a healthcare organization in New York, who can, you know, hop online, especially with, you know, for folks on behalf of people who, you know, have some difficulty, you know, navigating the system and setting up appointments. And that's not just in New York, but, you know, we're available to connect with musicians all over to facilitate. And, you know, it's, like I said, it's very encouraging. We're hearing from a lot of musicians who are getting vaccinated. We're hearing from many who are and they're feeling good. They're through their second cases and out of the 2-week window beyond that in a few cases. So with sort of typical and minimal side effects, that's really encouraging. We're hearing from others that we want that they're trying to get access, but are having difficulty. You know, again, we're navigating and facilitating where we can, because we understand, you know, all the issues around accessibility and equity, And we are talking with musicians who are understandably skeptical and hesitant about the vaccine, and we have resources on our side, doctors and experts who can connect with musicians directly, fellow musicians who can kind of share their experiences peer to peer, all with the hope that we'll have a vaccinated and healthy population able to return to work, in the foreseeable future. And so another part of kind of getting back to work is resuming our live programming and our outdoor programming. We have a program, the Jazz in the Schools program, another one called the Gig Fund, and these programs are cornerstones of what the JFA does, but for the past year, they haven't been an option for us. These programs provide gigs to musicians in schools, hospitals, nursing homes, all kinds of places that are extreme high risk. But we also do outdoor programming in parks, museums, community centers, and as the weather warms up, especially in New York, but all over the country, and with kind of restrictions and guidelines changing around performances, we're really excited to get musicians back to gigging. And this will be, largely in New York, a partnership with NYC Parks, and in New Orleans with the Mint Museum, and elsewhere kind of throughout the country, throughout the Midwest, Detroit, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Chicago, where we have pockets of clients, and in California as well. And then the final step beyond that is, and this is where Steve comes in, we don't have details or dates to share yet, but we will have our annual spring fundraiser sometime in the next 3 months or so. Again, we've had to move all of our events online. Our gala at the Apollo Theater, A Great Night in Harlem, of course, was canceled around this time last year, and our loft party as well. So, we're looking at our next event as, the third of our kind of major live stream concerts, but kind of integrating maybe some live audience members, should regulations permit, and kind of easing back into the live music setting, because, that's where this organization really thrives, and of course where the music really lives.
And before we let you, our listeners and viewers today, find out how you can help, Steve, you're involved with all this effort and as far as putting projects together, but what personal story can you pass along about being a part of JFA, that somebody that has really touched you, that JFA has been able to help along the way?
Well, part of the JFA initiative, which is so wonderful, and their mission is the idea of discretion, which is very important for artists who are very proud and have gotten into the field because they have no choice. I like to say that being an artist is a pre-existing condition. You can't help it. This is what you're going to do, and it's not something that you can help. So, there have been a lot of people that we take care of that you would never think would need help. Some people that you've listened to your entire life, who through one circumstance or another has been left in a situation that they need assistance. And that's what the Jazz Foundation is really built on. And that's something that really grabbed my attention when I first started working with the foundation. That was the thing that grabbed me. People can keep their dignity. Some people are more than willing to share their story, how the Jazz Foundation has helped them, like Abby Lincoln and Clark Terry and legends like that. But there are other people, Roberta Flack as well, but there are some other people who rather keep it close to the vest, so to speak, and that is totally understandable. And that is something that we never breach people's confidence, and that to me is just wonderful, because I see a lot of foundations or whatever, they always, it's almost transactional. Well, if I do this for you, what are you going to do for me? That's not what we do. And So I've been able to help legends that I know personally that didn't know that they could go to, that there was a JFA. You know, my first encounter with the Jazz Foundation of America was totally serendipitous. I was working on an event for Hubert Sumlin. It was called Howling for Hubert. And we were going to pay tribute. We were going to have a birthday party and pay tribute to Hubert for his 80th birthday, and it was going to go through another foundation, which would remain nameless. And they didn't have a permit to hold a fundraiser in the state of New York. So then I found myself, I have all these people lined up, Eric Clapton, Keith Richards, you know, you name it. Everybody wants to do this thing. And I got no foundation. And somebody said, have you ever heard of the Jazz Foundation of America? And I said, what? Who? What? I'd never heard of the foundation. It was wild. And then, so Wendy Oxenhorn, I have a conversation with her, who was the founding director. And she started telling me all of the stuff that they did. And I started to get information. And I said, this is the best kept secret in America. This is insane. You guys do all of this? And that's how I got hooked. And so I've been able to help personally some friends of mine. And then I see all of the work that the foundation does, because it's not just people who you've listened to your whole lives. But the thing about being an artist is you may never get to the status where everybody knows your name or has heard you on record or whatever. But you are, you know, that a lot of that stuff has to do with timing and circumstance, luck. It's not just talent. It's, you know, and so there are a lot of great musicians and singers that live gig to gig, you know, in this gig economy. You know, when the gigs dried up, there were no people were left, you know, completely helpless. You know, the thing about when you play live dates all the time, especially on the club scene. In the club scene, is like you eat at the venue, you know. So now there are no gigs. So now you're living from gig to gig. So now the gig is over, but that means more than just it's a domino effect. Not only do you not have that income coming in, but you don't have that meal that you counted on that day. You know, that drink at the end of the night that you look forward to after playing a great set, you know, all these kinds of things, being able to commune, the network, maybe for another gig, you know, all of these things were completely wiped out. And so in the interim, we've been able to do some virtual concerts, some virtual fundraising events to kind of tide us over. And that's where the COVID-19 Musicians Emergency Fund comes in. We were able to do a gig in May called The New Gig. It was our first virtual concert. And that was when people were really starting to get a handle on how they were going to survive this period. And then we just did another one a month or so ago called Bird Calls, where we celebrated the great Charlie Parker's centennial, and we raised more money for the fund. So, you know, this is a foundation that my wife, Megan Voss, and I are very proud to be associated with. And you know, I couldn't be happier with the collaboration.
We're going to talk about you and your wife's partnership and the Verbs as well. You mentioned Wendy Oxenhorn. She really created the first A Great Night at Harlem Gala concert back in 2001. Let's have a clip now that features Wendy talking about JFA.
It's not just that we pay rent and keep people from eviction and homelessness when they either have been diagnosed with cancer or they're too sick to tour or someone has an accident. It's so much more than that. We become family. This is a 7-day-a-week gig. You know, when someone's sick, we show up at their house with food and whatever they need. If they need to go to the hospital, we take them. Most of the people we've helped are probably people you first learned to dance to. It's not just jazz and blues. We're talking R&B, we're talking soul, pop, rock and roll. These are the people we help.
Wendy Oxenhorn. And I know Gary Walker, the morning host at WBGO and my partner in the morning, has always talked about how great Wendy is and how great the JFA is and how it has really come through for people. And now more than ever, it's important that you, the listener and viewer, help us out too in this situation. And you have the opportunity to do that right now as we're beginning our fundraiser. And I want you to know that when you make a contribution starting today to support the music you love on WBGO, you can also help musicians in need by giving an extra $5, which will go to the Jazz Foundation of America's COVID-19 Musicians Emergency Fund. Now, how can you do this? Your contribution will support what you hear every day on WBGO and assist jazz musicians in need. And so your contribution in any amount to WBGO and an additional $5 will make a difference in your life and the lives of many jazz musicians. So you can call 1-800-499-9246, or you can go online to wbgo.org/support and get that done. Joe, we're excited about this partnership because we're all in this together. The musicians, the announcers, the music, the listeners, the viewers, we all love what goes on the stage, and we all love what we hear on the radio. It's so important. Why has jazz made a difference in your life, Joe?
Wow. Let me thank you and thank everyone at WBGO as well for this support first. I've mentioned to the colleagues over the years, really, it's such a common occurrence, seriously, for me or one of my colleagues to call a musician to check in on them, and the first thing they say is, "Let me turn down BGO, and let's chat." So yeah, do feel that between the artists and the JFA and the radio and BGO specifically, it's such a it's a key triangle. And in my life personally, I discovered jazz just through exploring music with friends in high school, and it really the path was kind of set at that time for me. I was playing a little music, studying some jazz, but performing mostly in kind of rock bands and punk bands. But I was just sort of infatuated with jazz and fascinated with the history, and it's something that really compelled me to come to New York and move here for to go to college. And my first job, my first internship after starting school was with a writer and editor named Howard Mandel, who's many of your BGO listeners are familiar with, and was a former editor of Downbeat. And through Howard, and the Jazz Journalists Association, I became connected with the Jazz Foundation back in, I think 2001 was my first encounter. So I eventually came to work at the foundation in 2008, but now this connection and the connection to Wendy Oxenhorn specifically goes back to 2 decades. And I think what the Jazz Foundation specifically and jazz more generally have meant to me is it's just a way to kind of celebrate the gifts and the magic that I kind of revere above all other things. I think that the ability for artists to meet on stage for the first time and to collaborate and to improvise together meaningfully is so profound. I think the versatility of the artists, to play across styles using kind of elements of a common language is, something that I think we should all aspire to, in whatever form, we're working or practicing. It's a great guideline for kind of a way to navigate and communicate in the world. And I think what the foundation has opened up to me is this really deep and meaningful opportunity to connect personally with artists that I only knew on record, or that I admired when I was a young person. And I think just the understanding and coming to know the continuity between the artist's work and in their life, and this amazing kind of insight that the foundation affords, especially as artists grow older, and even sometimes when they're not able to perform any longer, that really everything they do is art, and everything they say shares these lessons. So Steve and I often discuss how one of the great elements of our work, and I think in many ways JFA is sort of it's a human services organization kind of masquerading as a performing arts presenter, because the core of what we do is this direct assistance. But of course, everything in our presenting universe has been elevated so much working with Steve, that we get to put on these world-class shows. And what Steve and I discuss is how really sometimes the greatest element of those shows is backstage, and it's the hang, and it's the camaraderie of artists. So I think what jazz and the Jazz Foundation means to me, it's just this instantly renewable source of inspiration for how to be human. And it's as cosmic as that. But I'll say, like, to me, there's there's nothing outside of the love of my family, and that moves me like this music. And I think it's as vital as the air we breathe and the water we drink, and that's why we're devoted to supporting the people who make it.
You mentioned a key word there. You said, across styles. And Steve Jordan has been a part of all different kinds of styles and music, and has worked with the greatest musicians and performers of all time. So, Steve, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about, you've been able to have this magic touch with not only greats of the past, but greats of today, like Bruno Mars and John Mayer. What is it about Steve Jordan? Because this is important, because when you can connect to a younger audience, we're also supporting the JFA from not just people who are caring about older musicians, but really caring about musicians of today as well, because the gigs have just dried up. So what is it about you that you've been able to make this wonderful connection and play with all different kinds of cats? And I know you have your own radio show, Laying It Down with Steve Jordan, and one of your buddies is John Mayer, and you talk about this wonderful relationship you have. Can you go into that?
Well, I think the connection is basically based on the truth. That's how I approach music. That's ultimately how I'd like to approach my life. And if you make the right choices, you're fortunate to be put in the right spots, so that you can carry on the truth as you see it. And that will make you relevant and not date you. You're not a fad. You're not a trend. So when I made the connection spiritually and with my playing, what was important, the right balance of head and heart, I then tapped into what the truth was for me as a musician. And that goes across every genre, every age group, whatever, because music, good music, in my opinion, is timeless. Like Louis said and Duke said, there are only two kinds of music, good music and bad music. And so I love the Ramones as much as I love Sonny Rollins. It's like that. Okay. So I'm not a jazz snob. I'm not a punk snob. I love music. And, I started out playing symphonic music. I love Mozart just as much as I love Lennon McCartney, as I love James Brown. When I grew up, I was listening to Miles Davis in one ear and the Beatles in the other ear. And that's how I see music. And the thing that's important about the preservation of jazz is that it's truly America's art form that we export to the world. It's our greatest export, is this music. And people who have invented other styles of music came out of jazz. Earl Palmer, who played on the great Little Richard records, who was one of the founders, the architects of rock and roll. All he wanted to do was be Max Roach. Fred Below, the architect, the drummer, the great drummer on all the Chuck Berry records and Muddy Waters. Same thing. He was a jazz drummer. You look at the Funk Brothers in Motown when they were playing at the 40 Grand Club. They were playing jazz with all the great jazz musicians that came out of Detroit, that went through Detroit, all the time. And they would then go into the studio the next day, and it would be their day job. They would just happen to cut 10 number one songs in one afternoon. They weren't compensated for it. That's a whole nother story. But the sound of young America came from these men and women who came out of the world of jazz. And it goes on and on and on, from Louis Jordan to whatever, Fats Waller, you name it. It all came from jazz. Okay. Jazz and blues and gospel, of course. That whole trifecta is the thing that burst into rock and roll. And here again, this is the country's greatest export. Music is a universal language. And as musicians, we have the good fortune to travel the world, meet people, make people happy. We are ambassadors of goodwill. And so that's the beacon. So consequently, if I'm playing with John Mayer and I can tell him what I go through, or some wisdom that Sonny Rollins dropped on me, I'm going to do that. And that's some of my greatest, some of the greatest joy I have, is passing on these things that I've learned from our elders, the greatest musicians. I've been so fortunate to be at timing is everything. When I was, the Board of Education in New York City was so vital and vibrant with music. And when you were a kid, you went to school, you came home with a clarinet or a paintbrush or something, public schools, before the government started cutting into the arts, you were encouraged to develop this part of your personality. It's equally as important. I remember being at a party, at an MSNBC party, and I'm talking to Alan Greenspan. He's controlling the world's money. And all he wanted to be was Benny Goodman. He plays the clarinet. He wants to make a record. I said, I'm going to make a record on you. Come on, let's go. I mean, this is Alan Greenspan. Everybody wants to play music.
They do.
You have, and so, and that's the thing. That's the thing that brings people together. And everybody has a favorite song when they met the person they love, or whatever, or the thing, or whatever. They remember a song, or they have a series of musical melodies in their minds and hearts that remind them of different things that are very important to them. And I think that's the thing that connects us all.
What's magical for you performing with your wife, Megan Voss?
Well, look, it's pretty incredible to have your soulmate be the person that you can wake up and either they're, when we lived in New York, now we're upstate New York, but we in the, because she started out as a classically trained pianist. So sometimes, I'd wake up and she'd be practicing Bach or something, which is like so cool. Okay. Just crazy. Then we started writing together, and I've always had this idea of a band and a certain type of band with the music that I love, and she had a couple of bands, one particular band called the Antoinettes that played at CBGB's a lot. In fact, they were managed by the great Hilly Crystal for a period of time, and so she played CB's a lot. I always wanted to play CB's like really hardcore with a band that I was never able to really get with. So this marriage and a lot of different levels happened, and the Verbs were born, and we just woke up, wrote tunes, and recorded them because we have a recording studio in our home. And it just blossomed out of, here again, the truth. We didn't know that we were going to tour. We didn't know anything. We just wanted to write some songs together. And then I said, well, let's record them. And at the time, she hadn't actually played out in years because she had no real intention of going back out. And then things started happening naturally. And next thing you know, we're touring Japan and making records and having fun. And it's just completely natural. And, when we started our own label, JB Records, several years ago, it was really we didn't want to actually weigh in, have some A&R person weighing in on our music. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing worse than somebody who was born yesterday weighing in on music that you've been making for your whole life. It's just like, oh, I can't do that. So we started our own label, and we put out, Verbs Records. We also put out a Robert Cray record that did very well, Robert Cray and High Rhythm, a Mixed Master Mike Steve Jordan record. We're putting out, it's a label that specializes in one-off signings. So you sign with us for one record, and you get to make the record that you want. And that's what we're doing, and we're having a blast doing it.
That's fantastic. Joe Petroselli is the executive director of the Jazz Foundation of America. There are so many needs right now because of COVID, and whether it be families in crisis, a lack of gigs, health. How do you prioritize where this money goes that comes in? Because that has to be very difficult right now. As you mentioned, the number of cases has really swelled.
Yes, it's very challenging. I mean, what we rely upon is a staff of licensed clinical social workers and case managers who, one by one, do an individual intake with an applicant. I mean, that's the most important thing, is just establishing a trust and a forum to kind of share the circumstances in someone's life right at the beginning of our sort of interaction and in our relationship with the musician. So, and so many musicians have said over the course of the last year, it's great just to hear a voice on the other end of the line. It can be so hard when you're sending out applications in different places just to reach someone directly. And what we do is, especially during COVID, I mean, like you mentioned, we have a focus on the elderly traditionally, but under emergency circumstances, we're trying to cast, as big of an umbrella as we possibly can in terms of age, and really in the way that Steve was referring to, as far as genre and style, because we all recognize this common origin for the music. And so, we just really begin with a conversation kind of based on what's going on in someone's life. And it's interesting, over the course of time, we see circumstances like a client who we encountered because their house had flooded during Hurricane Harvey in 2017. Got back in touch with us this past year because of COVID kind of taking away all of their gigs. And then just a few weeks ago, they suffered due to the grid failure, had a burst pipe in the freeze out and, needed a plumber at their home. So, there are many different types of circumstances, that contribute to sort of a hardship or sort of deprivation in someone's life. And, we're just, we're starting, especially in the past year, it's just we take for granted and we know that no one's working. And even those who are doing the occasional live stream or who have been doing occasional sessions, there's no substitute for the regular weekly gigs. And, teaching has transformed and changed, private lessons, teaching in schools. So, there's so much struggle. So really, we're just at the same time that that the need has increased for our clients, and we've had more and more applicants, we've just been making a bigger and bigger push to garner funds, and that's why it's so important to donate and to continue to support the COVID-19 Musicians Emergency Fund, because we've said all along, musicians were, among the first to be hit by the economic effects of the pandemic, and certainly the health effects, and they'll be among the last to recover a resemblance of normalcy as far as working. So this remains very urgent, and we just look at the big picture of circumstances when we're when we're trying to prioritize cases. It's very uncommon. It's highly uncommon for us to say we're not able to assist. And that's we feel very fortunate in that. We also, I'll say, we rely on a network of partner organizations, other helping agencies in the music space, to whom we can refer people where there may be a different fit, or more likely we can collaborate to pool resources. So I would say that really, in order to kind of accommodate the need, we've had to stretch and push on the fundraising side. We've had to expand on our case management side and bring in, extra hands just to ensure that we do have this personal connection with artists, and then really draw on other community resources to amplify our support for individual cases.
I just want to have our listeners and viewers realize just how important this JFA is, because why we have these two individuals with us today. Joe was a senior associate at Beyond a Little Associates, the firm responsible for dramatic growth and popularity of walkathons and other peer-to-peer fundraisers. He's got a master's in business administration from NYU Stern School of Business, BA in English and comparative literature from Columbia University. So you get the idea about how important he is. And then we talk about Steve Jordan. So, Steve, I have a question for you. As a drummer and as a sideman, you've worked with, as you mentioned, Keith Richards, everybody you could possibly imagine, the greatest performers of all time. On a personal level, you've had to plan a JFA Foundation concert, but there's only one left, let's say, okay? And you're only allowed 3 performers in the concert, and it can't be your wife or anybody from the Verbs. Who are the 3 people that are going to perform for this JFA concert if it was one that you just had one more shot? Who would you bring with you and why?
Wow, I think that's the toughest question I've ever been asked in my entire life. So Doug, congratulations. And we're talking about people who are obviously still able to play, because, Sonny Rollins would be on the show, but he's not playing anymore. But he would be our guest of honor, along with Quincy, one of our main board members, the great Quincy Jones. And let me just say this, if I can just go off on a tangent quickly again. These board members that we have are incredible. Most boards, and you see all these illustrious names on these boards, they don't really have any contact on the day-to-day with a foundation. But when you have a board meeting and Dick Parsons is there, and and Jared Lillian, and the last board meeting we had, the late great David Dinkins was there, and Danny Glover, and all these other, I can go on and on, Jimmy Owens, all these people, we have great board members, but these people are usually just lend their names, but they're actually there. They're active. David Fraser, it goes on and on. Mike Suki Novogratz. I mean, and so that's a great thing. So getting back to this show. So, I would probably, even though we've had Herbie on before, we gave Herbie Hancock our Lifetime Achievement Award. One of our biggest regrets at the foundation is we were trying to get Chick Corea a couple of years ago, and it didn't work out. And now we don't have, we won't have that honor anymore, even though he's with us in spirit. So I'd have probably Herbie back. I would probably try to get Paul McCartney, actually, because Paul, he's a lover of all music, and I think he'd be chuffed to be invited. And of course, he's tried his hand with stuff. He did work with the late great Tommy LaPuma when he collaborated with Diana Krall. So I think that could be good. So you got Herbie, you got Paul, and I would say, and we have a lot of great women, from Alicia Keys to Andra Day, who's now just really knocking it out of the park. We've had Sheryl Crow on a couple of things. We had the great Sheila Jordan on our last Bird Calls. But I would probably go try to pull Alicia Keys in on this one, because she plays piano, and she would be a good kind of mix between Paul and Herbie.
Would be a fan. Yeah, that would be a fantastic concert.
Yeah.
Joe, thinking about having these performers all come together, and when we talk about the need for the Jazz Foundation of America, and you hear all these people who care about your foundation, that has to make you feel so good. And yet we talk about Women's History Month. Here we are, and Steve brings up a great point as he brings up, who are the women that are a part. And we talked about Wendy Oxenhorn and how she has helped the Jazz Foundation. But how about the musicians out there that are getting help? Do we have a number of them who are women?
Yes, we absolutely do. And I think more and more, I think it's always been the case that, we've had women musicians requesting assistance from the foundation. I think this is kind of in proportion to their sort of presence in their community. What's really important to us at the foundation on the programming and the presentation side is to make sure that we have that same equity in the outward facing components of what we do, whether that's in the Jazz in the Schools program or the Gig Fund program or our major events. So we have fantastic band leaders like my dear friend, the great Bertha Hope, or who's been working in the programs for more than a decade. Bertha's longtime bassist, who was also featured on our Bird Call show, the great Kim Clark, who again is someone who just represents this confluence of styles like Steve does, playing in Defunct at the same time that she played with Joe Henderson, and across generations. It's very important for us to kind of highlight musicians kind of across the spectrum.
Just have a couple more questions. Steve, when you're thinking about, education in schools, as Joe talked about, And I know you've worked with Steven Van Zandt, and we've had him on the air here recently talking about his programs to really make education better and music education. Is jazz education where you want it to be right now in the schools? What else can be done?
Well, I am not completely versed on what public schools are doing with the idiom of jazz, but I can take an educated guess and say no, they're not doing enough. But as we start to look at history and untold history, this is the story of this country. See, so as we start to re-examine what history books are telling us and getting the story right, that will filter down into our music programs so that we can actually put jazz in the place that it actually belongs, as opposed to this fringe type of music, and put it in the center of the and make it acknowledge it as the true American art form that it is. Once we designate it that way, then we can see its importance and then teach it like that. So it's not like, when you go to music school and you're studying the classics and everything, and then off to the side of, there's a little jazz program here, for you guys, you crazy little guys who want to experiment, no, it should be something that is a focal point of any real serious music education course. And, look, there are a lot of schools now that are, especially in higher education, that have very expanded jazz programs and stuff like. So it's come a long way with that in that regard. But I'm talking about elementary school, that's really, because that's where everything is formed. When I teach, I've always said, even when I was a teenager and started giving lessons, I said I'd rather teach somebody who was 8 years old or 7 years old than somebody who was 16 or 17 or 20 or 25, whatever, because by that time you've already formed an opinion about what you think is important or what you're going to be interested in studying it. But when you're young and you're a sponge and you're still malleable, you can then the teacher can have more influence and open your mind to certain things, and you're more open to and willing to accept certain things. And so I think K through 6, we can get jazz education in there because it's such an important part of American history. Then we'll be getting somewhere. I don't think that has happened yet, and that's systemic. That's going to take a while. That's we're going to need a Secretary of Education who actually understands what that is. We don't, it won't be a Betsy DeVos kind of person. It's going to need somebody who really knows the importance of this music on our culture. So that's going to take a minute.
You mentioned, and it's interesting, we need to learn about history. It's quite interesting that film and movies and documentaries lately, you think about some of the ones that are getting lots of attention, whether it be jazz and blues. You think about Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. You think about the United States versus Billie Holiday. You think about Green Book a few years ago. And these are, really bringing out this music and really educating a lot of people who weren't aware of just the implications and the times that musicians face too. So when it comes to COVID now, Steve, as we learn about this stuff, a lot of people have been watching these movies because they're inside. What's been the toughest conversation that you and Megan have had regarding COVID?
Oh, the toughest well, that's interesting. Well, it's all about, for us, and we're very fortunate in our situations. I mean, we can still help people in need, which is our primary goal. And we're fortunate enough to make some music, and through technology, we've been able to work on certain projects still and there's a studio that I work out of up here in the Berkshires. that Pilot Studios, where the person is that runs the place, is very CDC conscious, and so we follow the guidelines. We're very safe, and we're able to navigate. Um, the conversations that we have are really about. I always say to all of my friends, think of this as a marathon and not as a sprint. It's about your mindset. If you are not patient, you're not going to make it. Now, other people are more fortunate than others to be in a situation where you can afford to be patient. And I'm totally aware of that. But these are the conversations that we have. How are we, how we're going to help some friends. What are, pacing ourselves over this period of time. And then when everything opens up, let's be ready to do what we have to do. And, the obvious conversations of the making this a political issue when it's not. It's very sad to see a mask wearing thing turn into a political issue. I mean, what's happening in Texas and Mississippi in particular is really, it's a gut punch, because they don't realize that they're setting the entire world back. It's not just about their personal freedom. It's something that can devastate the progress that we're making. And when you're that close to the finish line, and then you want to turn and run in the opposite direction when you're back, it absolutely makes no sense, and it's very distressing. So, we talk about that. We kind of shake our heads, but we try to lead by example, always masking and staying proper distance, and encouraging people to do so, and having some tough conversations with some people about it. Because it's quite shocking, actually, that when you see the level of selfishness that we're encountering in this country. It's disappointing, but I can say that we both see light at the end of the tunnel. And that's the most encouraging thing about all of this.
Joe, I'm not sure. I think you probably are aware the new gig was the first live stream of the week on the WBGO website. Before we give the information out again, this is your chance to tell our listeners and viewers why it's important they support the Jazz Foundation of America.
Okay. Well, I think that we've discussed over the last hour or so how much joy the music brings to everyone around the world, and as Steve has discussed, as a performer, it's it's so wonderful to share this music. And the proposition of the Jazz Foundation really is that artists kind of give heart and soul to create this meaning for listeners, and far too often they don't receive enough in return. And so supporting the Jazz Foundation is an opportunity to show your love and your appreciation for the artists who sacrifice and struggle to do what they do, and to help provide them, especially in this period of sustained hardship, with direct support for basic needs like rent, groceries, and utility bills. I think what we can all appreciate is that even under quote unquote normal circumstances or in good economic times, life is difficult for artists, musicians in particular, and musicians who are playing jazz and blues and roots music. So this is an opportunity to offer something in return.
Those that know me know I love to laugh. So last word from you, Steve. Who's the musician that makes you laugh the most? Either backstage or while you've been doing some things online? Who's the person that makes you crack up? We need to unmute your mic there.
Oh, sorry. I say Keith Richards is the funniest. He's full of one-liners, and he's a brilliant man, and he makes me laugh constantly. In fact, when we walk into a room together, the first thing we do is laugh, actually. We start laughing. Before we even say anything, we just start laughing. And that's the environment that we've been able to cultivate over our long friendship and partnership. So yeah, he makes me laugh.
One of the greatest rock and rollers of all time with the Rolling Stones, and he loves jazz.
And he does love jazz, you know, and as Chuck Berry said in Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, when Keith played a couple of chord progressions that were intriguing to Chuck, and Chuck said, man, you should have been a jazz musician. And Keith turned around and said, yeah, but there's no money in it. And which was very funny, but tinged with a little truth. Yeah, you know, and just to get serious for a second there, but kind of, you know, veering off from that statement, is just like if the $15 minimum wage had been passed or gets passed, how many people will be will be brought out of poverty, right? And how many people will be wiped off of welfare rolls, right? Well, and you know, it's the same thing in the world of music. You know, if record companies have been doing the right thing, we might be supporting a quarter or half of the people, you know, or less of the people that we support. You know, I mean, this is one of these age-old problems that I have. You know, like if people have been doing the right thing from the very beginning, who knows? We might not even have a Jazz Foundation of America because everybody would be cool. But that's not what's happening. It's, you know, there's a lot of money out there that belong to people that they're not getting, and we've discussed this for years and years, and people have come up with plans that haven't been able to come to fruition, and there's no real urgency to rectify this problem from the people who can change it, not from people like us who are advocating for it, but the people can make, because it's this, here again, it's a systemic problem. And one day we will be able to rectify this. But until then, the Jazz Foundation of America is extremely important and will grow more important as the years go.
Joe, I know you want to share a note about Steve and Keith.
Right. Yeah. I think you asked earlier who Steve would invite for the Dream Gala. And I think one of the reasons Keith is not on that list is because he invited him 6 years ago and he played at our 2015 Great Night in Harlem. That was the same year that we honored Sonny Rollins. And that, for me and for so many others, was just emblematic of, you know, this universal family of music, you know, again, across styles, across genres. And I've been reminiscing a little about, you know, the genesis of that event, you know, where we honored Sonny. And I think it ties a lot of the streams we've been discussing together, because it was at Clark Terry's memorial at Abyssinian Baptist Church back in February of 2015. Clark was a longtime client of the foundation. He was a great inspiration to everyone affiliated with the organization, you know, and he made some public statements about the work with JFA. And of course, the film Keep On Keeping On really documented the incredible things he did from his sickbed after having, you know, double amputation and being on oxygen at home and losing his eyesight and having operations on his stomach. But at his memorial, Steve was there along with Sonny's bandmates, Clifton Anderson, the trombonist, and the great Bob Cranshaw, you know, who was also a longtime board member of the foundation and advocate for JFA. And I remember Bob telling me that he had met Clark Terry on his one of his first ever sessions playing on a record called the Big Soul Band with Johnny Griffin, pardon me, Johnny Griffin's Big Soul Band. And Bob said he was like a little disorganized at the session, and Clark, who had done the arrangements, I believe, kind of helped Bob get it together and gave him some sort of tough love and a little stern admonition. But just this is how you got to conduct yourself on the gig. And it was this great bit of mentorship from Clark, who of course also mentored Quincy Jones. And Bob went on to tell me that he remembered meeting Steve at SNL, and when Steve was a teenager, right? And sort of mentoring Steve, and kind of counseling and coaching him there.
You took the words right out of my mouth. You did the same thing for me.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
And then Doug, you went on to say that and Steve elaborated that this is the kind of teaching and tradition that Steve is bringing to everyone he works with, but including John Mayer, who he mentioned. So just this experience where you can draw the line from Quincy and Clark to Bob, to Steve, to John, and so many others. It's incredible. And just that day, I remember everyone saying, we got to get Sonny to the Apollo. We haven't done this yet. It's imperative. It's the most important thing we can do. And this is after Sonny had sort of stopped performing, but he took the stage that night in October to accept his Lifetime Achievement Award. And he brought the house down with a kind of 5-minute monologue, just talking about growing up in Harlem, seeing musicians at the Apollo, his heroes, just testifying and just shouting out, Lester Young, Charlie Parker, Ella Fitzgerald, everyone. And again, it's this, it's indicative of Sonny, even without the horn, conveying so much beauty and truth, with his humanity. And that's the lineage of the foundation. That's what we celebrate at the foundation. And I think what people really embrace when they support the foundation is they know, even who they're helping, even of course, everything is confidential and discreet, like we've discussed, but you really see the impact of what you're doing. And it's a real blessing.
And that night was I just want to say,
Sure.
that night was incredible. And that speech brought me to tears. And it was the thing that really made me feel like I'm so fortunate to be a part of this foundation, because we were able to be a part of this night. If we did nothing else, this was unbelievable. I'm true. And that's the thing about all of our events right now. Something special happens at each and every one, that, whether we're giving Gladys Knight the Tommy LiPuma Award for recording excellence, which was unbelievable. I mean, it goes on and on. Roberta Flack getting her award. I mean, it goes on and on. And I've, with all the things that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of, these evenings have been so special. They're one-of-a-kind evenings, and it's a real blessing to be a part of it.
And that's saying something. And when Steve Jordan makes those comments, do you need any more reasons when you make a contribution starting today to support the music you love on WBGO? You can also help musicians in need by giving an extra $5, which will go to the Jazz Foundation of America's COVID-19 Musicians Emergency Fund. Your contribution will support what you hear every day on WBGO and assist jazz musicians in need. So you can do so. You can call us at 1-800-499-9246, or you can go on our website at wbgo.org/support and not only support the music you love, but those who are making it and those who will continue to make it for future generations. Joe Petroselli, what an honor to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Doug. Thanks to everyone at BGO. We deeply appreciate it.
Steve Jordan. We're looking forward to more Laying It Down with Steve Jordan. Can't wait to see who your next guest is.
It's going to be a good season. Thanks for having us, Doug. Yeah, we got like Mary Clayton going to be coming up, and Smokey Robinson, and Roger Hawkins, and there'll be some fun stuff. You'll dig it.
And that is also another just offshoot of what Steve Jordan is all about, as Volume Radio on Sirius XM is where you can find that wonderful show, Laying It Down with Steve Jordan. And of course, he is the artistic director, along with his wife, of the Jazz Foundation of America. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to have you on the show, and continued success with JFA.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you. Everyone stay safe.